Today, we're going to explore sweet spots on this 12-inch tom. We're going to move through the full range of this drum and show you how you can find the sweet spot of yours too. For this journey, we're going to start at the lowest usable tuning of this drum. It's a 12-inch drum. Yours may differ in terms of how low you can get it or how low you think is the lowest. This is where we're starting today. Let's hear how it sounds. Now, just to get out in front of it, when we talk about the lowest possible tuning, we're talking about the lowest possible tuning that sounds like a 12-inch tom, that sounds good to us, that records well, etc. So again, if your results of lowest are different, don't worry about that. This is just where we're starting. What I did for this drum today is, it had the heads on it already. I lowered them until I was getting flappiness and no real tone out of either of them. And then I brought them up really slowly until I got something resonant where both of the heads were able to make a pitch and were not giving me buzzing in either of them. Then I experimented with bringing up the reso just a little bit because that's going to add a little bit more tone and compensate for how terribly low the batter is currently tuned. Once I found a spot where I had a little bit of a difference between the top and the bottom with the reso higher, I elevated the pitch slightly because I was still getting a little bit of noise, and I want to get essentially a more purer tom sound, but at the very bottom of the range. Again, depending on your drum and the heads you're using, the pitch that's the lowest for yours might vary, but this is what we're working with today. When working in this range with a tom this size, the note that you're hearing doesn't really get very far past the close mic that's only a couple of inches off of the head. When you start to get into microphones or listeners that are further away than that, the tone that you're hearing goes completely away and you're left with largely a bit of the pitch bend you can hear and the attack, and that's basically it. This doesn't make this a bad sound or an unusable sound or maybe even some kind of sweet spot, but it's important to understand that in a certain range of a drum, there are gains and losses and you have to work within those parameters. Let's go up 1 degree. We're going to do a bunch today. This will be number 2. As we're moving through these, my goal with this tuning is to retain a good amount of tone and make sure that the sound is pleasing, because after all, I want the drum to sound good to me. And also, I'm thinking about the sort of playing that I would do with a drum tuned in that range, because the actual sound and the range of the instrument can inform what styles and feels would be appropriate. We are deliberately not changing the tuning of the snare drum or the tension of the wires for the duration of this, because the interaction between the tom and the snare, specifically the wires, over the course of this range is going to change, and that's worth noting because we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking about a range to tune the tom as well. Let's hear a little more of this tuning number 2. This one feels pretty versatile, it's still pretty low. Let's move on to number 3. Things are starting to tighten up a little bit. It's getting a rounder sound, a little bit more sustained perhaps. We're moving into the middle range of usability with this drum now. This is starting to get us into a range of tuning with this drum and specifically tension on the batter head, where we're starting to be able to use a wider range of dynamics with it. If we think back to that first one, it didn't do too much when I hit it gently. Hit it hard, sounds pretty good. But now in the middle range, we can get very gentle with the drum and still have tone at a very low level. Now, this isn't to say that you can't hit a drum in this range super hard. This is really just about choice, use case, and what your ears prefer. All right, let's keep going. Next tuning. Again, we're just going up here. The interval between the batter head and the resonant head doesn't really matter all that much because, again, these are taste things. This is more about the range of the drum and where it really sits the best and gives us the most effective sound. As we're moving through all of these tunings, which are not dramatically different than each other, it's important to note that we're not necessarily moving the reso at the same amount per tuning as we might for the batter. We're really using the reso to get the best sound out of the batter head and thus the entire drum as we go through this range. Sometimes they're very close to the same pitch and other times the interval is larger, which is all the more reason to remember that wherever you are in the range of your drum, the idea that there's a correct interval between the heads, not necessarily the best choice. Let's keep going even higher. At this point, we're getting out of the realm of maybe drums that are working for rock and pop and moving into a world of, well, world music or maybe jazz or something like that. Again, we can't stress this enough. That doesn't mean that you can't play other kinds of music with drums that aren't tuned the way you think they're supposed to. If anything, it's an opportunity to expand your ears and experiment. Like, for instance, right now, very high 12, still a low 16. Sounds awesome. At this tension, the rack tom is starting to feel more like a fairly low-tuned snare drum. I can roll on it, it's buzzable, you can do diddles and things on it, and it turns it into a different kind of versatility, which is really worth exploring, particularly if you tend to live in lower tunings. Now that we're in the high range of this drum, I'm getting away from how we were tuning earlier and actually tuning the batter higher than the reso, where in all of the previous examples, the reso was actually under more tension than the batter. This gets us tone, but also allows us the tighter feel on the batter so that you can play rolls and diddles and rudimental stuff on there a little bit easier than if you were dealing with a lower tuned, more slack batter head. This is particularly great, again, for jazz, for anything that's rudimental, for a lot of different world music styles where you want to perhaps emulate hand drums or something like that. And also, it's just an exciting alternative to what we're used to if we tend to live in lower tunings. Okay, we've arrived. Final tuning. It's very high. I would consider this to be about as high as I would ever tune this particular 12-inch tom. Again, as we said before, your mileage may and probably will vary because of your heads and your sticks and the rest of it, but this is very, very high. It still feels good. It's not choked. Neither of the heads are table-topped out, but compared to where we started, this is ridiculously different. There's something worth mentioning when it comes to ranges of toms where we can be experimental like we're being today and have a very low 16 and a very high 12, but there's also the thing of authenticity. If you're trying to sound like a certain style or a certain era, or you're being asked to emulate something, the first thing that's going to come into play is how do your drums sound? So if we can step away from the idea that there is, well, a sweet spot and start to get into the idea that all of these sounds are valid and whichever one was your favorite is your sweet spot, now we have options. Yes, you heard us correctly. There's no sweet spot in this drum. Whichever one of those you liked the best is your personal sweet spot for this drum, but it has nothing to do with anything that this drum did to us. We have ideas and expectations and things that make us happy, and that is really where the sweet spot lies for any instrument. Depending on the context you're playing in, the music that you want to make, or the music that you like and that you want to emulate, you're going to generate your own sweet spots for all of these things, and that's fine. But it has nothing to do with the drum in front of you and everything to do with your preferences, your ears, your technique, and how you feel that day. What we did today is something that we think everyone should do with all of their drums. Do it today. Go from as low as you can get it, incrementally, to as high as you can get it, and pay attention for the duration of all of that. Consider the possibility that there's more than one use, more than one exciting sound, and more inspiration in each one of them that you've never ever heard before. This is a perfect opportunity to practice your tuning as well. And don't be afraid that you can't get back to where you were before, because you're going to move through that range on your way from lowest to highest. It's in there somewhere. So use it as an opportunity. Don't think of it as a chore. Think of it as building your relationship with whatever drum is in front of you. For me, I've never done this experiment with this particular drum before because we tend to go for one tuning when we're tuning up the drums. I heard multiple sweet spots for me personally that gave me mental images of where I might use them, from high to very low to somewhere in the middle. And this is exactly the reason why taking the time, giving yourself that opportunity, is going to open you up to new possibilities and maybe just make you fall in love with your drums again.